Smart cities and artificial intelligence offers a comprehensive view of how cities are evolving as smart ecosystems through the convergence of technologies incorporating machine learning and neural network capabilities, geospatial intelligence, data analytics and visualization, sensors, and smart connected objects, to name a few. The recent advances in AI move us closer to developing operating systems that simulate human, machine, and environmental patterns from transportation infrastructure to communications networks. Understanding cities as real-time, living, dynamic systems coupled with new tools, including generative design, allows readers to plan, manage, and optimize city operations, making cities more efficient and sustainable with the ultimate goal of becoming self-regulating. Welcome to the program today. I'm your host, Brent Cooper, and today I'm going to share an interview I did with Christopher Kirwan. He's an architect and an academic that wrote a book called Smart Cities and Artificial Intelligence. It's a sprawling book, which I edited and contributed a lot of research for, particularly sort of metamodern theory and the background of broader convergence theories. And this is an interview we did about an hour long. And it's, we sort of hit the ground running, but it's a good touch point to connect with my article about the book and the book itself, if it interests people further. So I'm happy to share that, and I'll just give a plug to my project, if you will. I'm looking to grow the Patreon community. It not only supports this work, but it supports future work and the generation of this type of content and this movement. So, take notice of the ticker going across the bottom of the current patrons, and you can add your name to this list for as low as $1, and even $1 helps this program grow because it adds your name to the project. And I'm more interested in strength in numbers than I am about the finances at this time. So just get in at the ground level, get instant access to the first paywalled content, and also all the free content that I've created over the past several years, going back further to the satirical film, The Abstract. All of it is available online and will be further available through the different social media channels that The Abstract can be found on. Without further ado, here's our conversation on how to smarten up societies and the smart city momentum that is going to roll over this planet in the worst ways if we don't do better to intervene, make these systems more humane and harmonious with natural ecosystems. You have many hats, and so I kind of see you as an architect, as a designer, as a consultant, a project manager, an academic, and a radical too, if you're comfortable talking about that. I think that spectrum of interests is important and relevant to what we're trying to do, and we'll center the discussion around the book that we worked on, that you and your co-author in China spearheaded, and you came with this idea of convergence, which I loved, and then I was able to just be supportive as a researcher and editor, and I think we, for the limitations that these types of books have, I think we achieved something pretty interesting. And if nothing else, it gave us a kind of deeper sense of meta theory and convergence, and how systems change happens, and how smart cities are kind of inevitable, whether we want them or not. So let's start with give yourself a brief intro, if you will, and kind of talk about the book and kind of from your perspective.
I think to jump into the real core theory behind the book and the intention of the book is that really, when we're talking about technology is temporal, and technology is going to become obsolete very quickly. And I knew that even though I've been working on smart cities for a couple of decades at least, I needed to think of something that would be more universal in the subject of the book, and how the book could impact, relate to technology. So the idea of convergence over really a period of time that allowed us to think about the evolution of technology and humankind and nature as a collective process was really what allowed me to think beyond just technology alone, because every level and stage of technology is going to continually change. And human, it's why we kind of compared the Earth's evolution to human population evolution to technology in such a short time. Technology has affected us, yet it's only within the last 100 years that the sort of high technology that we're called now has really had an impact on our lives. And yet we believe in the next 50 years, which has been accelerated because of COVID, probably to 30 years, a lot of this convergence is going to take place. And it's going to bring Earth, humans, and technology together even more. I'll take a break.
Yeah. Yeah, and I noted in my article about this book that there was a Scientific American article, and right off the top of that article, they know 4 converging crises, and those are the pandemic, the political crisis, climate change, and the economic depression. And so, we have 4 clear examples, but just to zoom out, more generally, the concept of convergence kind of comes from evolution, but then, as you said, into the human and technology spheres, we see it play out still. And especially with technology, the idea of like co-discovery, just and combination of technologies, those are 2 examples of convergence. And then we dove into the literature, the different research, and there was we found, kind of came up with this diagram that there's convergence theories of organizations, of evolution, of science, of nature, of tech, of knowledge, and of society. And then there's different sub-theories about, the convergence of knowledge, society, and technology, right? So people have already thought about this quite a bit. And it's kind of, we're just trying to advance that theory and formalize it. It's kind of it's something that we can just look at descriptively, but also proactively, that some things should converge and are converging and can't be avoided.
Well, I actually think that one of the key aspects that we identified and I think made the case for is that there's a lot of discussion on technology itself, or even on the implications on society. And what we want to say is that evolution is happening, that humans and technology and nature are evolving states, right? So it's in a way it's beyond our own control. That blockchain is going to allow the recording of all of this evolutionary activity and the convergence to take place, and it will be able to be recorded and in the future tracked to see how things evolved and what patterns were created by this convergence, and that we'll be able to understand it from a behavioral point of view as part of the evolution itself, because humans and nature and technology are coming together beyond, in a sense, beyond our control to a certain extent. And so I think where I'd like to say we want to differ a little bit on the positioning with other social theorists or other political theories about technology and the influence of technology on society is that in a way it's happening beyond the social dimension. It's influenced by the social dimension, but it's happening beyond the social dimension. So convergence is nature and evolution itself. And that's why, whether we were programmed by, a higher consciousness to develop technology to provide a solution for our own demise, or to support the demise of the planet that we've helped to accelerate, perhaps there's a reason why this is happening.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, very well put, and it's an important distinction to make, to say that convergence is natural, evolutionary, but it's also something we play a role in. There's feedback, there's reflexivity. And so, we're not trying to naturalize the evolutionary convergence and just say it's all good and it's all natural. We're trying to say a large part of it is natural, but that we don't want to naturalize it, because part of, recognizing what we are as free agents, if you will, is recognizing those limits, but then trying to take control with what little agency we have to kind of shape and steer society in a positive direction. And under capitalism, the whole smart city concept leaves a lot to be desired. You can't blindly put faith and trust in it. So we're trying to take a critical, nuanced approach.
That's right. Well, I think you said it, where if we want to be positivistic, that, I mean, I was just in my building in New York City yesterday, and I was leaving and talked to the concierge, and he's very negative. He's negative. He's saying, I see the whole thing's coming to, New York City is coming to the end, basically. I mean, it looks like it's in a negative spiral politically. There's so much homelessness. There's so much, there's so many problems that we're facing. And I just said, my book, what I wrote about is that evolution is going to it's going to play itself out. I mean, whether it's going to come to just a destructive force or not. The thing is that the technology is part of the evolution. So I believe that it will work itself out, whether that means that cities will have to be balanced in a different way. Populations will have to, I mean, in a sense, the whole issue of global warming and higher rising ocean levels will mean that people will probably migrate out of urban areas that are coastal urban areas to more inland, and that will naturally balance the population. Then what happens to the urban areas that were, overpopulated? Well, that evolution will figure out sort of what has to happen as from an Earth ecological point of view. So I think we can be self-centered, but it's beyond us in a way. And we as you said, we're playing a part of it. We're one of the actors in the stage, and we think we are a major actor. But as I like to reference Alan Watts saying, we may just be a case of dandruff on planet Earth, and we may not really be as important as we think in the evolutionary history of the cosmos. We're just a nanosecond.
That's right.
That, really doesn't have that much impact. However, it's based on our own perception of time and space. So we are part of it.
Yeah, we need to hold both truths simultaneously. Like, of course, in the long term, we're a blip and our existence is meaningless. But in the shorter term, we have a lot of compassion and meaning that needs to be exercised. And along the lines of what you're saying, certainly a lot of industrial towns have been hollowed out. There's this phenomenon of malls themselves being kind of ghostly structures. And there's obviously that sucks in a lot of ways, the unemployment that comes with it, but it should be seized for the opportunity that it is too. Like you're saying, migration due to climate change. We have to make the choices to invest back into these, not old industries, but to sort of refurbish and rehabilitate the social space. And that dovetails with a lot of what you talk about with phenomenology, the kind of the ontology, if you will, the experience of being in different architectural spaces. And what we might call the difference between metamodern and hypermodern architecture and urban development. Just briefly, another way to juxtapose those is like solar punk for metamodern and kind of cyberpunk, or more dystopian for hypermodern. And of course, those are kind of, caricatures and fantasies. Nevertheless, it's still a kind of clear choice where we need to be putting what little meaning and free will we have on this planet towards that type of development.
Well, I think, part of the convergence consciousness that we talked about is that humans and nature and technology need to become more part of each other rather than seeing them as the objective physical world and technology is something else. It's all part of the same, let's say, nature's plan in a certain way that it's coming together. And our highest goal is to create higher consciousness in the relationship between humans, the environment, and technology, how it can help us. I did come to the conclusion, we did in the book, that technology has alienated us up until now. And I did a film, I never showed that to you, Brent, called Three Elders' Perspectives Living in a Technological Society. I interviewed the ex-running mayor of Boston, who I mentioned, Mel King, and he was the head of MIT as a Caribbean American. I interviewed a very interesting engineer scientist in Boston and a woman who was ninth generation New Yorker, and her name was Rose, and they were all in their 80s or 80s when I talked to them about living in a technological society. That was 25 years ago. I did that film. I still have that film, and they were all, they're saying what I'm saying now, that we have to be sensitive to each other, to nature. But what I came to the conclusion is that technology could be the interface between humans and nature. We hope that with sensors, embedded sensors, and data analytics, and everything that we're creating, that technology will reunite us with the environment, the way we were thousands of years ago. And so it won't be that technology has separated us even more, but I believe it will bring us together. So we're right at that convergence from, or you could say, almost, it's sort of an unfolding of a new dimension that will happen, that will bring us closer to being sensitive. If used correctly.
Yeah.
We did premise that it could be misused.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just to add context to that, right? There's a whole movement of transhumanism, which also is kind of adjacent and married with kind of libertarianism, right? So we're not naive about the kind of gold rush towards fusing technology and human beings, and the dark sides of that. So this is precisely why we're talking about it, why we should be talking about it, and how to kind of thread the needle. And I wanted to say, because you mentioned Mel King, when you mentioned him the other day, I looked him up. I didn't really know anything about him, and what a fascinating history. What an influential person. He was also a politician for some time, and so like you said, he was the director of this MIT program. But there's so much more to the story. And of course, this is part of kind of Black history and progressive politics. And so it's just so fascinating to learn about and integrate. And one more thing I should have said right from the outset, I meant to say that the book, by the way, it's called Smart Cities and Artificial Intelligence, and it was published in May of 2020. So this interview between us is a long time coming, right? We worked on the book for a year, about a year, and then it came out, and then we've sort of been back and forth over time, trying to get to this interview. So I'm glad we're doing it, and just to kind of give ourselves and people a sense of a time frame, because I think the ideas are so much more important than the book project, but we crystallized it in the moment. And now here we are. I think a lot of, especially what we're saying about convergence, it'll continue to be kind of validated year after year. So it's yeah.
Well, there's another dimension to it, which I'd like to refer to the author I just, actually came across today. which is Graham Priest, and he's written on basically subjects of in a logical philosophy, but he is very much coming from an Eastern and Western perspective. The other Convergence was the co-author of the book, Ziyong Fu, Professor Fu Ziyong, based in Beijing. He and I worked together for almost 10 years. And the first convergence point was that we need to be working together between China and the West, or Asia and the West, because if we don't, I think, one, the planet's gonna, be worse off because we're not understanding each other as humans, and working 7 years in China and learning Mandarin and trying to be deep into really a Chinese point of view gave me a lot of perspective on, that the West doesn't, understand everything, and but neither does the East. So we need to bring both dimensions, and not only East and West, North and South, and in a multicultural point of view. To back to Mel King, was a Rainbow Coalition, and it was all about community activism and working with different points of view. And actually, through him, I have to say, I tell people that story where I was in Boston when we were developing a new part of Boston, and we had every type of person in the room, and we did a workshop that Mel led, and we broke off into, say, 6 groups of 6 or 7 or 8 people of all different backgrounds, economic, socioeconomic backgrounds. And actually, after one day of brainstorming and workshopping and collaborating, we are actually able to come up with unifying principles as a group from people that had completely different understanding of reality, from very poor people to very wealthy people in Boston, from different ethnic groups, different cultural backgrounds. And we were able to, that gave me hope that actually, in America, and then when I was working in China, I never had that kind of experience. It was with pretty much just, which would be the Han race of people that are the dominating race of, dominating the demographic in China, was sort of one point of view, one consensus, within the Communist Party and a sort of view. And then on the other hand, I was in a place where we had completely diverse opinions that could come together. And you wouldn't, you don't expect that could happen in terms of consensus building. So collective intelligence is part of what we talk about in the book a lot, which is a convergence of different points of view, whether it's East or West, or political points of view. It's not just taking it from one side. We have to be sensitive that we have to factor in all of the points of view, and we have to find consensus, like the United Nations goals and some kind of sustainability goals. We need consensus as a collective. Otherwise, we're not going to achieve sustainability, right?
Yeah, exactly. Consensus is something I've written about and advocate for, and it's a process you have to work through, and you need consent from people. And it works, ironically, it works in conditions of low trust and high uncertainty, which is kind of conditions that we're always dealing with, right? So it's one of these, positive feedback mechanisms that should be pursued, and it's, for its own sake. And you point to an excellent example, which is not just the workshops you're talking about with King, but the wider context of the Rainbow Coalition, right? So the Rainbow Coalition was a very diverse and very effective political movement, like all left movements, up until the point that it gets, quashed or suppressed or whatever it may be, or appropriated or, assimilated, so it's so necessary to recenter it, recenter these examples of consensus building in that context, because it's hard to find today. We find a lot of really compromised, really just sort of liberal centrist kind of modes of, they'll have their workshops, they'll have their seminars, but it's not this deep listening and kind of like, at the same time, like Mel King, really scientifically, technologically informed. kind of community building. So I'm glad that we can kind of hit these touch points in trying to, articulate the bigger vision coming through the book and your work and what I'm trying to facilitate.
Well, something you just pointed out, which I'd like to say it, in this interview, which is that when I moved to London, and the radical aspect, which you might have described, that could be part of my characteristic, is that I'm growing up in a liberal environment and in Boston, Cambridge, in a very, say, educational, Harvard and MIT environment. I actually don't want to just be sitting around with other like-minded liberals. I want to be hearing different opinions. So when I moved to London, a group of people that I was introduced to in London were highly conservative and completely maybe on the opposite side of my political upbringing. But I actually spent most of my time in the last 5 years in London dealing in more ultra conservative environments, which allow me to express my opinion even more than if I was just listening to people of the same ilk. And the same goes to being in China. I really immersed myself to be listening to how the Chinese understand things, and not in Beijing, how people in Beijing. I didn't try to impose my views. I tried to understand how they're thinking, so I could be better at also understanding myself, but also being able to help the collective intelligence, dialogue, so that it's not just about the West or the East, and that also goes on a spiritual and religious space that I've investigated in my own life, where I've not decided to be practicing, one religion over another. However, I've chosen to go in a religious path that allows me to understand people that maybe in the West wouldn't understand in Islam, which I've explored in the last 25 years, because there was a disconnect between American society and the Muslim world. And I see that doesn't have to be that. We have to start to understand, well, what are the differences? We got to listen, not impose our views. So this is a little bit different subject but it all comes back to collective intelligence and convergence, because if you're not willing to, understand other systems, you're not going to be able to adapt to the change that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And none of it's forced, but it's absolutely necessary as a counterpoint to some of the forced tensions between countries or between ideologies, right? That's just the norm for so many people. And so what you're saying about, US-China relations, those are such important alliances to take seriously politically, not just in terms of, technological development and smart cities. And then you're also talking about, that's that same listening and convergence with religion and all Eastern religions and the Middle East, and of course Africa too, right? We need to be able to examine all the relationships critically, like China-Africa relationships, US-Africa, and US-China. But then also just be sensible and pragmatic, as opposed to all of the kind of nationalist posturing, the very partisan commentary. Like, it shouldn't be controversial to say, the United States has its authoritarianism and its Orwellian and draconian aspects, as does China, as does Russia, as does Brazil. But that's not the people. And it also matters, who's in charge, right? It's a big difference in Brazil between Lula da Silva, the leftist president who found a great deal of success, and the right-wing president, Bolsonaro. So, just in terms of, grounding that discussion, whether it's technology or politics or whatever, in the spirit of collaboration and working together, because that's evolutionary. It's part of evolution to be cooperative as opposed to just competitive all the time.
Yes. Well, if we're going to converge, then we got to be able to understand different systems that then, either it's going to happen biologically through the force of nature, or it's going to happen through better understanding of each other to find commonalities and sustainable solutions globally, as you said, between different political systems. I really don't find, I don't see it as a problem. I think it's all, self-imposed to create, fiefdoms to protect interests. I mean, but from a pure ideological or sustainable point of view, we have to work together. And knowing how Chinese operate to some extent, I can say that I think I do have enough knowledge. It took a while. It wasn't easy to adapt to a different context and language approach, but I think I understand, and I have sensitivity to how the Chinese are approaching things, and I don't think it's wrong. I just think it's their way of doing it. So we have to find a way to collaborate and accelerate technological development in the positive way, which is that if the competition between China and the US, for example, or the East and the West, the competition could be and help us to accelerate the convergence, which is necessary to sustain the planet. And so that competition can be healthy. It doesn't have to be antithetical in the way that we are really in a trade war with each other. Now, I'd like to add to the interview is 2013, I was with the China-US Trade Alliance, which I was with John Kerry, Secretary Pritzker from the US, with the Chinese ambassador of the US. We were together in Beijing, cooperating on renewable energy technologies. I was part of that. We built an exhibition in Beijing on green technologies with Lockheed Martin, which is basically providing military, weapons and equipment. Yet we were working on ocean thermal energy, which would be something on the scale of like nuclear energy that is a very much a source, which is the ocean, to create renewable energy. That was a joint venture of China, U.S. working together with John Kerry, I would say a visionary and very diligent, sustainable, architect. So we got to think about other options where we can have those kinds of collaborations and not all be, back to trade wars and negativity, and we can collaborate.
Yeah, and what popped into my head was, with respect to COVID, if we're to trust the numbers coming out of China, and let's just say that they're relatively accurate compared to the United States, it's night and day, right? So, this is something that you can see in the American response because of all the, news media based, but also, executive branch based kind of fear mongering about China, that they're just missing a huge opportunity to collaborate and for America to get its own healthcare system upgraded to a basic minimum standard and, get people healthcare and get this pandemic contained. As we said, it's an example of convergence, but in a bad sense, right? The virus potentially spreads all over the world and, needs a kind of convergent policy response to do that. So, each country has its strengths and weaknesses, and we really need a global effort, not just different bipartisan tracks.
Absolutely. No, the intro, the preface of the book is that China and U.S. and the East and West, not just limiting between East and West, but we have to collaborate as the superpowers. We have to be working together to lead the convergence, right? And we have to do it in a healthy way, whether it's through competition, through healthy trade competition, or intellectual sharing, or whatever it has to be. It's going to have to happen. So we might as well be proactive with it rather than being reactive and being resistant, right? So I went to Beijing under that spirit again. And by the way, working with Professor Fu, who was very busy during the time of the book, but we had, bi-weekly exchanges, intellectual exchanges, that were highly useful, sharing completely different, realms when we were developing it. And that actually is why the book is advanced with your great work as well. We were able to, you know, put something that has a more of a universal approach. It wasn't just a technological view or a Western view or a philosophical view. It was a combination of things. And I think we use the word somewhat techno-biotechnical determinism, and I think we should come back to that subject for a minute about biotechnical determinism. I'd like to clarify that, but if you want to elaborate first, put it back, the dialogue.
Yeah, maybe I'll just read a quote from the book because I have it at the top of my article. It's I think it's connected to what you're saying. The guided convergence of technology with natural and social systems to form self-regulating governance platforms will potentially be the solution to what humanity has constructed as our current demise. And so that is to say, like, a lot of our problems are related to technology in the first place. And the way we've kind of constructed our own narrative of self-extinction, literally with climate denial and stuff like this, but that the guided convergence of tech with social systems and with nature can solve that problem that we're creating. And that's sort of a simple, three-layered cake, but you came up with much deeper models like this six layer stack, which I call the continuum. And I think we're trying to address the paradox at all the levels of analysis.
Yeah, well, coming back to the biotechnical determinism, we won't mention other authors, but let's just say when we were critiquing, sort of other positioning of the tech revolution and the idea of Big Brother and all of the issues of society being influenced by the technology footprint through social media and through everything else. I don't really want to get into that debate, really, because I think the biotechnical determinism point of view is that there is a greater force happening beyond the sociological, let's say, behavioral control of technology. There's many influences on how we perceive things. And if we look at it only from a sort of sociological point of view, we're actually neglecting a naturalistic point of view, or we're not looking at the biological evolution of things, systems, right? So we're becoming too human-centric in a way. And I think one of the people that I met, is an interesting reference we did make was some colleagues, was really that we are moving from human-centric paradigm definition to something that is going to be, I would say, more pluralistic, and where we're not looking at it from one angle anymore. Now, we needed a human-centric approach to come out of the last evolution of, let's say, functionalism, which in a way let us sort of neglect the human perception and the human factor. We became too deterministic. But now we're kind of going back to a new human nature technological convergence determinism, which is beyond ourselves. That's kind of our position in the book, because you could be sort of biased from a human sociological point of view, yet we're really not, because it becomes kind of very politicized. So we didn't want to really take a political view on this. We want to make it more scientific and more objective in that sense.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes I use the terms post-political or meta-political to kind of address that level of commentary we're trying to do and intervention.
Well, as opposed to, I think because your work itself is spanned between the sociological critique and then moving into, say, when we were in a dialogue, we kind of moved more into the technological critique or an urban critique. I think it's been good for you, in a sense, to broaden your own perspective from a sociological point of view, because I believe it becomes kind of biased to look at it from a pure sociological theory when we're also looking at, let's say, identifying nature as a player, in this discussion now of global warming, because we're just looking at it from the human point of view of control. Now, I think we should address in this conversation maybe a bit about Big Brother and cybersecurity and cyber control. It is an issue, right? But I think we addressed it through evolution.
Yeah.
That evolution will somehow is beyond the human factor.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what you're commenting about decentering the human, if you will. I mean, that's a trend happening in other domains, other discourses. The idea of anthropocentrism, just like Eurocentrism, is, just by saying the word, you kind of reveal what the bias is, what the problem is, and definitely, like, like there's different types of kind of meta sociology and sociological realism, but I take your point in that, often a lot of my ideas about social change are just way too normative for their own good. Like, I'm very normative, like, we need to go in this direction, we need to give people health care, we need to educate rather than put people in prisons, etc. But at the same time, what trying to write about a topic like smart cities and all of the investment behind that, just the momentum of these things, and also green energy obviously is part of that conversation. But you get pulled in different directions between a kind of greenwashing perpetuated by the fossil fuels, and then actual authentic solutions, which sometimes are more simple forms of living, or sometimes there are technologies that can save us that we don't pursue aggressively enough for different reasons. I think nuclear is one of those things. Yeah. I'm not an expert, but politically I've bought into it just because it's become safer over time, and I think it's one of these kind of boogeymen that if we can deal with it safely in a relatively sustainable way, then it is a kind of fast track to dealing with the fossil fuel dependency, but also kind of freeing up the energy crisis itself. Right, so that energy can be provided sort of anywhere on demand, and then we can accommodate sociological imperatives within that new frame.
I mean, well, I appreciate that you're recognizing your own discourse that it has limitations, right? But what I'm not saying that that convergence solves the discourse, that we are sort of so much pluralistic that we don't have a meta discourse that is somehow, I would say, biased one way or the other. All we're saying is that there is something beyond the anthropocentric approach that, someone just told me today, I don't want to listen to the discourse in America right now. And I just said, I just don't listen to it at all, because it's not helping me. It's just, I want to be on a different level of development, proactive development, rather than listening to, I would call it, dissonance or some kind of, just basically noise. I mean, it's just noise. Yeah. But it's part of, it's not that it doesn't have a reason. There's a reason for it happening. The pluralism and the polarity of society right now, there's a reason for that. It's either going to go to more separatism, or it's going to allow for a breakthrough and sort of unity, some level, like the Rainbow Coalition was fighting for. Beyond nationalistic and regionalistic views or racial lines or whatever. So I just think that the focus on the sociological discourse, we got to broaden it so that, Alan Watts, again, coming back to Alan Watts, who was, really a hippie, hippie thinker, but he was like, we're just tooting our own horn. We're not, there's something much greater that's happening, and we got to be aware of that. Otherwise, we're just politicizing everything for the sake of our own camp, and whether you're an intellectual in that camp, or you're a labor, trade union activist, or you're someone representing a racial group that's disenfranchised. It's just discourse. We're not really making progress. It has to be beyond that. And that's, where Convergence has a potential to at least identify an evolutionary direction that is beyond our own human discourse, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a good moment for me to make the point about emergence,
Yes.
which is very popular. And, we're not discounting emergence. Like, convergence doesn't, sort of trump emergence, just like with the concept of divergence in the evolutionary discourse and research. All these words are used. They're kind of related terms. The processes flow into each other, right? And so we're advocating for convergence in that context, in that literacy, to say, sure, emergence has a role, but I think in a lot of spaces it's dangerously kind of fetishized, and just too much stock is put in thinking that emergence is going to work out if you put the right ingredients in. I think cooking is not as simple as just putting in the right ingredients. It's, you have to, prepare things a certain way and source it a certain way. And these are just useful metaphors to give convergence more recognition for its place, right? Because like I said, a lot of research has been done, but the idea of converging, as in coming together, overcoming conflicts, I think it scares a lot of people, especially if it's kind of forced. So yeah, we're just kind of proposing for this embrace of that worldview and recognizing its function with respect to emergence.
Yes. I haven't spent as much time as you have focusing on emergence, so I can't really give my views on it, except that being a little bit corny, saying, convergence and emergence is yin yang. So, I mean, you're going to have polar opposites that balance, so convergence being how things will come together. They're also the birth of new things, that will create new energies that allow convergence also to have its own biofeedback, so that new growth allowing for life, for natural systems to go through their own evolutionary process. There's got to be this play between emergence and convergence to achieve balance, because if it's all convergence, then there's no new growth kind of contrasting it, because convergence means, in a way, that the same system keeps moving more and more. Now maybe it could reach a point of convergence is entropy. It could be, but I think that that's why, I mean, I'm bringing up something, it's a little bit, what's the word? You may be trite, but yin yang. But I do believe that in the force of nature, this is in its own way of resolving that.
Yeah, we would do well as a species, as a society, to build as much consensus as possible, right? But then within that, recognizing what the limits are of science, of determinism, like what is going to happen for certain, and what little interventions can we make to adapt to that. I think as a species, as governments and societies, we're very behind. We're behind where we could be. And Alan Watts, to bring him back into it, he was a philosopher first and foremost, and kind of I don't know if life coach is the right word, but I grew up with his content and found it very inspiring. And that is to say, like, there's room for the confluence and convergence of all of that, the spiritual kind of approaches, the technological and biological determinism, sociological kind of negotiability and potential. I think our civilization has a lot of unrealized potential.
No,
And
absolutely.
this next decade and the following decades especially, it's all about learning as a species and intergenerationally too, which we can attest to here, that it's a new enlightenment, right? Many people have put different spins on that kind of term, just describing this and advocating for it. But that's really what it is in terms of all of us continuing to just deepen our knowledge, purge kind of any kind of harmful dogma, and just realize how much room there is and how much potential and agency there is within that new consensus. Like, doing the work in itself is worthwhile, but then to come out of it with a rainbow coalition, one deeply part of this MIT and technological movements, that should be the dominant paradigm, and it still isn't.
We're still prehistoric. Well, I would like to enhance that by saying that we I think we're, as you said, there's so much room to grow with going beyond our own limitations to whether it's really, as Alan Watts, I think it's interesting that you brought that back, that it was he was a spiritual guru, and he went to the East, as a lot of intellectuals do, to find something beyond Christianity, and whether that's through Hindu or Buddhist philosophy, and ideas of reincarnation and ideas of karma and things that bring us into a higher consciousness, whether chakras, different levels of being. And part of convergence does have to be, not that's sort of why the balance between emergence and convergence, because it's got to be this, I think, this interplay between different states that allow you to reach higher either consciousness or being, where we are more sensitive to our environment, to other people, and that's what we're trying to work on here. It's and when we asked about smart cities, we're not talking really about technology. We're talking about the evolution of society to become more livable and sustainable and more in harmony with the world around us, as part of it, is part of the ecosystem. And I think what we talked about is the ultimate goal is that we'll achieve a self-regulating position, which I've just finished another paper, which is going to be published in Springer, on autopoiesis and self-regulating systems. And it's all based on the idea of natural systems have their own sustainability, which is through biofeedback systems, and between the cell or the object and this environment. It's all this symbiosis that allows life to. So autopoiesis is life itself. It's sustaining life. So the future of cities and society has got to become, we are nature. We are nature. That we think we're not, but we think we're beyond nature, but we really are nature. So Alan Watts is basically, that's what he's fundamentally saying. We're part of nature. I know Joseph Campbell, was another guru who really looked at he tried to see it through the lens of different cultures, so that we could understand cultural language. We could look at history and discourse through, the different, I think, linguistic and metaphorical points of view to life. And so that was a rich repertoire to allow us to be sensitive to that. Humans have built some amazing institutions and languages, but through those we have to reach another dimension, or we have to access the higher consciousness through those evolutions that we've formed as different societies.
Yeah, I wanted to make a quick point, just sort of an anecdote, but that's I've always found it kind of curious that the term in computer science, BIOS, means basic input output system, and I've always just found that a comforting kind of coincidence, because it's like you're talking about biology and human nature, and that sort of reality of that bios, biology, is also a kind of basic input output system. So I just thought that was kind of cute, if you will. But yeah, to pivot to the end, we're going to talk about what's next, what you're working on. I'm trying to reboot and relaunch this channel, this platform, and you've got lots of different irons in the fire and projects on the go. So yeah, tell me everything you want to about that.
Well, I think I was really using the book as a platform to go to the next level. And someone gave me a good analogy, which was, in a way, writing a book is kind of like doing a PhD. It's a sort of 3-year to 4-year period where you're concentrating on a subject and trying to prove, an argument or a theory that you have. And I think that's what it achieved was, and I think I wouldn't say that I had understood convergence, or I wasn't necessarily, I might have been living the idea of convergence, but I hadn't articulated it the way we did in the book. And using the case studies, as you mentioned, that you and I worked on, and also in terms of the technological stack, in terms of other dimensions. So really, I see is continuing this research. I'm working hard to get opportunities to work with governments around the world. I am working in Thailand, and I'm working to get back connected in Saudi Arabia with the NEOM project. It's already got sort of its own critical mass, but I'm working hard. I'm working on a project in California. I'm working with potentially a city in the UK, which I'm meeting with this in the next month. And I just completed a master plan in Pakistan for the new total eco, let's say, we're calling eco village. It's quite a big area, but it will be more like a sort of a small city, which is all based on sustainable farming and very sort of low tech solutions to that environment, which is not a high tech environment. So it's applying the work, the theory, to real projects, and it's keeping the foot in the door academically. I'm still involved with the University of Reading and the informatics lab. I did get offered to be the director of the new program with the Polytechnic of Milan and Tsinghua University. It's their joint venture and they asked me to write a curriculum on smart cities, which we did for a new master's program. And everything was approved by the Polytechnic of Milan academic board. But it was in the middle of COVID here, so the actual students can't come to. But the main target would be bringing many Chinese students to Italy. But we've not been able to get it off the ground financially because students can't travel right now. So we're looking at creating a hybrid online version for maybe the next year. I was a little bit disappointing because I'd like to get that going, but hopefully that will accelerate when the time is right. So I think for me, in my career, I do give my father credit on to pushing me to say, keep one foot in the door heavily on the professional side and keep teaching and try to, wrestle with your life to do both, because it's not easy to sort of jump back and forth, because it's either you're a professor and you're kind of focusing on that area, or you're working full time and you don't always. To do both in a kind of hybrid way is probably the most rich, because you're getting both experiences, but it's also not easy to pull it off, because one gets neglected by when projects start or so forth. So I'm working hard to keep that both academic and professional sides interacting in what I do and how I think. It's just the most, I believe, I would say it's the most engaging, and keeping one up to speed on different discourses. So that's it. So that's where I'm going, and working between London and New York and then Asia and Middle East, and from the main point of view of where the markets are to do the work.
Yeah, I agree.
I would like to work. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. I'd just like to say I'd like to work in emerging markets or in developing countries. I would like to, but the challenge is the resources. Working in those countries has always been a challenge, right? So if you're going to work on advanced development, you got to be where there's advanced resources.
Yeah.
If you work in developing environments, you're going to be working with limited resources. So it's about kind of maybe cycling in the life. And one of the people that gave me the best advice many years ago when I was working with Mel King in that environment was maybe in activism, work a period of time in a grassroots way, and then maybe move internationally, and then come back to a grassroots activity. So you kind of, because you can get burnt out just working in a grassroots way where there's very limited resources.
Right.
You can even become obsolete yourself because you have nothing. There's nothing left, right? You get depleted. So you have to kind of continually replenish your own resources to be able to go back to projects that are giving back to society. And a lot of creative and mindful people end up getting marginalized themselves because they're trying to work in very much marginalized situations. And so we have to be sustainable to be influential.
Yeah, I'm on that spectrum too. But I was just gonna affirm everything that you're saying, and it's great for you to add that clarity too, because of course, a lot of places in the world are neglected, whether it's small villages or small towns, and that our approach is trying to, gesture towards changing the discourse and the habits of work in these spaces. And that, working on the book, we challenged ourselves. It wasn't the publisher pushing for this or that. It was us trying to make it as kind of ambitious and avant-garde as it can be. So I think that's a great way to round off this interview. It's been a really good back and forth, and we filled about an hour pretty effectively. Yeah. So thanks for your time, and
Thank you.
We'll be keeping in touch, obviously, and continuing to work on these things and advocate for these approaches and getting projects off the ground in this sense.
Yes, well, I look forward to how we can collaborate in new mediums as well as print into like this more, using media and interviews and documentaries and more publishable broadcasts, sort of multicast things that can create more content and get out to broader audiences, so that we're not just talking to each other. That where we need to go as collective intelligence, so to get it out there.
Exactly. So whoever picks up this video, comment, share it with people, participate with this new wave of paradigmatic thinking and also systems change, and how those two go together, and the fusion and convergence of East and West.
Yes. Amen.